Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the We Are Not Lonely podcast. Feels good to be back. Alright, so what's been happening? This podcast, like all other podcasts, have been rather delayed. Over the last couple of days, I've witnessed another friend get married. I've caught up with people that I haven't seen in at least 5 years, in up to 8 years. A lot of people are like, hey, this dude's still alive. It was nice. It was brilliant. Some of these guys hadn't seen me for 5 years, and I got to see them, and they saw me, and we met, and we caught up like old times again. Honestly, it was amazing, and I want to be thankful to all those who made it possible, all those who made it to the wedding. Had an amazing time. This particular podcast is going to be about another thing though. So, recently I've been doing a lot of thinking. I've understood more or less that it's necessary for me to come to a consensus about what I think about certain issues. I'm trying to form an opinion, and for that I've been researching, reading, listening to a lot of debates, writing down things so I can formulate my own opinion per se. Formulate my own opinion, not per se. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I'm trying to be a highbrow intellectual. Ugh. Anyway, so all of this happened, right? And it was brilliant. It feels amazing. I like where my life is right now, and I like the direction that it's gonna go. Now, the thing is, this particular podcast is not about all of that. This particular podcast is not about all of that, and it's actually about something else, right? Over the past few years, I've seen an extreme polarization. I'm gonna have to give you a bit of a background. Now, there are two primary parties, political parties in India, and it's relevant that I mention this because one of the political parties, the Congress, was actually formed in the backdrop of the Indian nationalist movement. Now, the idea is that the Indian nationalists created this party, but the truth is a little darker than that. Now, at the time, Britain had been ruling us for hundreds of years, and people weren't very happy about it. There was a mass movement, underground movement that was extremely violent. There were bomb makers. There was going to be a very violent uprising against the British, and the governor at the time, I believe, decided that they needed a way to let people let off some steam. And that particular idea was the Indian National Congress. This is the origin of one of the oldest political parties in the country. Right. The Indian National Congress was actually formed by the British as a way to let people let off steam. That's an interesting observation. This is not something that I particularly found out. It's been something that's been documented in the past, and I'm not going to get into all of that. That's something that you needed to know. And the BJP was far more recent compared to the Congress itself. The BJP was formed on the 6th of April 1980. Now, I'm not really going to go into an analysis of the entire political situation, but suffice it to say that the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, as well as the Indian National Congress are the two major Indian political parties. Since 2014, the BJP has actually been the ruling political party. And I'm actually currently going through the whole, shall we say, the Wikipedia page for the BJP, and it's interesting. I'm going to have to do a lot more analysis into this. For this, I'm going to have to give you a slight introduction to the political situation, because for some reason, religion is intrinsically related to politics in India. No, and I'm trying to uncover that reason. I'm doing a lot of reason and I'm doing a lot of studies and reading to try to understand what exactly happened to get to this particular point. All right. Now, the Indian National Congress, which is one of the two major parties, was something that was actually formed during the British rule. Now, I've recently come to find out that the INC, or the Indian National Congress, was actually formed as like a sort of a safety valve for people to let off steam, much like, you know, how you have a pressure cooker and the thing like psss, Indians will know. That's what the INC was, because at the time that the INC was formed, there were revolts all around India. There were a lot of bombs being prepared. There was a lot of unhappiness with the ruling government, the English, and the atrocities that they were committing. Now, all that is an entire podcast by itself, but that's pure history, and I want to be as detailed as I can be when I go into that. So I'm not going to be touching that right now. Better people than I have actually studied this, and some of the examples would be Vikram Sampath. I am actually currently on my way, not on my way, I'm trying to read a particular book called India, that is Bharat, the first book of a series of books that have been released by J.Sai Deepak. And we'll be getting to him more later. We'll be talking about him later in the podcast as well. Now, he's the one who made this particular statement on a podcast, and that's how I know about it. So the Indian National Congress was actually formed by the British as a safety valve to allow people to let off some steam, to air their discontent with the English in public. Because if they didn't have a valve, things would have gotten violent. One of the main reasons the East India Company was no longer ruling India was because of the Sepoy Revolt of 1857. And that's when Queen Victoria and her goons took over India. So, bit of a history lesson. I'm not going to go too much into history because I'd like to have my facts to a T. Now, the point is, the BJP started much later. It started somewhere in the 1980s. And now, the BJP has been in full power since 2014 under the leadership of Narendra Modi ji. And I'm just saying this out of respect because, you know, he's kind of old. Ever since this happened, there has been a polarization. It wasn't that strong back then, but it's been gaining support. And in hindsight, I realized that I hadn't been paying attention to all of these things until they blew up right in front of my face. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Generally, the BJP is attacked all around the world for being extremely right-wing and for favoring the majority, which is Hinduism, and they get attacked for Hindutva. Now, these are certain things that I'm going to be talking about and trying to explore the idea of all of these things. I've just peeked at the Wikipedia article because of the whole situation, and BJP is aligned with right-wing politics and its policies adhere to Hindutva, a Hindu nationalist identity. I am going to have to talk about that for sure. Alright, and all of these podcasts are going to be exploring this particular situation, you could say. I'm going to be needing to read a lot more about the political spectrum because this is something I need to understand. There's an interesting thing that J.Sai Deepak has actually remarked upon, which I'm going to repeat now, and I'm going to explore this particular idea. The idea that the left-right divide doesn't really work in India, and that he rejects the idea of a right-wing, especially when he is accused of being right-wing. He calls himself the Indic wing. And that's what I want to talk about, alright? Now, back in the day, you could have called me a secular person. In fact, I would have called myself a secular person, even though I was practicing, even though I was a practicing Hindu, I was reluctant to use the term religious because for some reason that term has been dirtied, it's been sullied beyond belief. And the other thing is that I would always call myself spiritual. I would refuse to be called religious. And we'll get into why, but it's mostly because of how the Abrahamic religions have handled the whole matter. And a lot of people that I've spoken to have actually said this. Now, compared to Islam and Christianity and Judaism, which are guides, basically guides on how to live, Hinduism is not like that. And a lot of people that I've spoken to don't really view Hinduism in the same way that they view religion. They find it difficult to call Hinduism a religion. And I suppose in some way that might have been the reason that I too was kind of conservative about being labeled as a religious person. I would always say I'm spiritual, not religious. There's a difference. Now, again, that's a complicated topic that I'm going to have to explore as well. But that's not why we're here. Now, initially, like I said, I was particularly secular. I would read, I've read the Bible, I've read parts of the Quran. I do need to read more of the Quran and the Bible, especially since it's been a while since I read them, so I know what I'm talking about when I bring up certain things. But the point was, I hadn't really studied my Shastras. I spent my entire schooling in a Christian school, and even after that, I was in a Christian college. It was only when I got to my MBA that I entered a college that was technically Hindu. Alright, it's a Hindu college, it's run by saints. But for some reason, the same pride towards religion wasn't there. They were always conscious about, oh, we have students from other denominations and they are not going to like it. Now, I will admit that there have been things like the Saraswati Puja. I've attended a couple of Saraswati Pujas in college, and that's something that has never happened in school or in thing. Like, when I was in a Christian school, though, I attended mass on a regular basis. We sang hymns. We listened to people read from the Bible and explain certain parts. Now, granted, I did not attend mass every Sunday because I wasn't a Christian. That was the only thing that were like, okay, you don't have to attend church today. And they would actually bring a pastor down to school for them to do the whole sermon and the reading and all that stuff. I don't know what really goes on in there. I've attended a couple of weddings, but kind of lost. All right. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that we didn't have any particular issue. The majority of the school was Hindu. The students were Hindu. There was a very small denomination that were Christian, and even smaller that were Anglo-Indian. My point is that we as Hindus didn't have any issue following all of these things. We would sing every hymn. Like, I still remember some of the things. Stand up for Jesus. See? Showers of blessings we need. Mercy drops round us are falling, but for the showers we plead. Stand up for Jesus. I remember the tune, not most of the lyrics, but see, things that I've done like 10, 15, 20 years ago are still in my mind. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Just see the amount of influence. By contrast, if you ask, no, let's not go there. Now, 2019 was a very formative year for this particular identity of mine. I started taking things a lot more, well, not seriously. I just started examining things more critically. Now, until that particular point, like I said, I was very openly secular, right? Until I realized something. And this particular conversation started with a conversation with a friend's uncle. Now, I'm not going to repeat the contents of that particular conversation because I want to navigate this particular thing very carefully. And it's sad that I have to do that because I can say whatever I want about my religion. I can abuse, like, people have literally abused gods and they're still alive and walking and they've actually been given awards. But if I bring up the slightest argument, slightest even point against two particular religions, but forget two, one particular community, there's an uprising, there are certain directives issued to the community that I'm supposed to be deleted. This is a fact. And I want to explore this particular fact because this was one of the founding principles of this country that has divided this country since independence. And we can no longer pretend like there's this Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, as scholars would call it. And that's what this next part of the podcast is going to be exploring. Now, I had my eyes opened after this conversation, and that was the spark. I started studying topics with an intention to understand more about this particular situation, and it kind of sucks that I can't tell you what exactly it was. But wait, you know what? So, okay, here it goes. The hornet's nest is being opened. My entire journey began when I heard about the true meaning of this particular testimony, I guess you could say. No, La ilaha illallah Muhammad ar Rasul Allah. And the basic meaning, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is no God except Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. It might seem like a simple thing, but once I understood what they were saying in this particular thing, I was no longer secular. Secularism requires both parties to meet at the center, not for one to be secular, only one side being secular. That's the Indian brand of secularism. Only Hindus are required to be secular and accept the extremes of other religions. That was the beginning. And there were certain other events, like in 2019, that really awakened me to the whole situation. Now, one of them, of course, was the Janma Bhoomi case, the Ayodhya issue, where, and let me just talk about that particular thing. Now, a couple of things happened in 2019 that really made me open my eyes to this particular situation. The first was the vehemence, the first was the Ram Janma Bhoomi case in Ayodhya, and the second was the case of Sabarimala. Now, these two particular things were Now, these two topics are incredibly inflammatory and it's divided the country. There were certain other events that happened as the years passed. Once the whole COVID situation got done, there were other things that popped up a little more recently, like the hijab issue in Mangalore, and so on and so forth. Now, the first thing is an issue that started long back, and this is gonna have to be explained before you make any sort of an understanding of the whole situation, right? So, the controversy behind the Ram Janma Bhoomi case is that at a particular time, there was a temple. This particular temple was built on the area that Sri Ram was born. Now, the importance behind Sri Ram is that he's one of the central tenets of our culture, we worship him as God. God descended onto earth in a human form, and that particular time he came down as Sri Ram. He came down to fulfill a certain amount of purposes and so on and so forth. And there was a temple built in the place that he was born. So there's extreme significance in this particular event and in this particular temple. Now, during the Muslim invasion of India, there were multiple Muslim kings that came to power, and one of them was in the Mughal lineage. One of them was Babur. He was essentially, the Mughals are descendants of the Mongols. They are descendants of the, Genghis Khan and so on and so forth. They have like this weird lineage. Okay, so they are actually connected to two particular conquerors. One is, of course, the Mongol conquerors, Genghis Khan, and he's also connected to the Turkic conqueror, Tamerlane. So this particular guy found the temple and destroyed it and built a masjid on top of it, and that was the Babri Masjid. Later on in India, once India came to be, I think sometime in 1994, I'm not particularly sure, a bunch of Indians attempted to demolish and raze the mosque, and this became a huge issue. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and this particular case has been fought in the Supreme Court for a very long time, and the decision came out in 2019. Bear in mind that the Janma Bhoomi had a lot of evidence-based arguments. It was a fact that the temple used to exist and it was destroyed, and parts of the temple were used in construction of the masjid. Now, multiple temples have been razed by Muslims in India. And generally speaking, the idols have been desecrated. The vigrahas, I will refuse to say idol from now on. The vigrahas have been desecrated, polluted, destroyed. The temple also destroyed, and in most cases converted to a masjid. Now, this is historical fact. People say the past is the past, let the past be the past, let us not bring it up today. But there's this collective memory that's starting to rise, and clearly this is an injustice, and 400 years of a masjid is nothing compared to the thousands of years of the temple. Any case, the decision came out and it has happened. The temple is being reconstructed. The issue that happened was the temple trust, at multiple times they were willing to share the land, they were willing for all of that, but the other side was not. They're like, this is our property, we want the entire thing, we will not give a single inch. And that's why the court case had to go on for so long. This entire thing brought about a lot of arguments. Now, generally speaking, whenever people say, why can't we build a university? Why can't we build a hospital? All of this, especially when Hindu temples are being built, no questions like this have been asked for the other two. All right? And this is going to basically be my right to worship. In fact, masjids are not even necessary for worship in Islam. A temple is a necessary structure for worship of a vigraha. A vigraha has to be housed in a temple. By contrast, namaz can be performed anywhere. In fact, it's a practice in certain parts of the country for namaz to be offered on roads on certain times. Now, these are all facts that have happened, but statement of fact is sort of an issue these days. Anyway, the second case was a little more inflammatory, I guess, because it was a Sabarimala case. Now, I'm gonna have to give you a little bit of a background. Sabarimala is a temple in Kerala, in the extreme southern part of Kerala. It's situated in a forest, on top of a hill. And the entire idea is to get to Sabarimala, to be qualified to enter Sabarimala, a person has to take up 41 days of intense tapasya. They have to be celibate, they have to perform certain rites every single day, they have to meditate, and there's a certain process that every individual goes through before they climb up the 18 steps. They call it the Padinettam. There's a huge philosophical meaning to whatever is happening here, and I'm not going to reveal it per se, but I will give a hint. The central tenet in Sabarimala is Tattvam Asi. People who have put on the mala are expected to go through intense tapasya while they're doing it, and they are referred to as Swami. All of them are referred to as Swami. They refer to each other as Swami. Now, Swami means God. I'll let you figure out the rest from that. Okay? So, Swami Ayyappan is the particular deity who's sitting on top of a mountain, who wants his devotees to go through a particular period of discipline, spiritual effort before they come to see him. Now, Sri Ayyappan is a Naistika Brahmacharya. This means that he has taken up a vow of eternal celibacy. And part of this particular vow means not coming in contact with the other sex, with women of a particular age. Now, this is a practice that is also followed, can be followed by women as well, Swaminis. If they take up sannyasam and if they take up Naistika Brahmacharya, if they decide to become a Brahmacharini, that means that they will not have contact with the opposite gender. It goes both ways. And there are people who actually follow this particular thing in India. And out of respect for this particular person's vow, women of a certain age don't go to meet this particular individual, this sannyasin. Now, recently, this issue has been conflated, and the idea has been that women are not allowed into Sabarimala. And to ban women from entering is a violation of their rights to practice religion, the violation of their human rights, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of arguments. So a lot of people, a lot of women's rights activists have started petitioning to enter Sabarimala. This is the background of this entire case. The judgment came about in 2018 towards the end, I think September, but there were massive protests. Now, the Supreme Court was comprised of a panel of mostly North Indian judges, people from the north of India who don't particularly understand the significance of Ayyappan. They haven't read the detailed agamas. And the issue would have been simple if it was only men who were, shall we say, protesting against the entry of women to this particular temple. But it wasn't. There was a long human chain that was formed, purely comprised of Hindu women who protested the entrance of women to Sabarimala. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying no women are allowed to go to Sabarimala. There's a particular age in between which women are allowed to Sabarimala. Alright? And this is where the issue got conflated even more. And this is where the prime issue has come about. The argument made was that women between the age of 10 to 50 shall not enter the temple. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but the understanding came about in the public eye that women are not allowed to go into the temple because of menstruation. And the entire argument has started from there. They've started comparing Sabarimala, this particular practice of not allowing women of a particular age into the temple, as discrimination, as untouchability, as it's equal to triple talaq, a lot of things. I myself have been called bigoted, evil, and I've been asked, how can you worship a God that does not want women to see him? These are the questions I've been asked. And they called me. Wait, I think I should go back and read certain messages that I got at that particular time. That's the best. I'm going to search the term bigoted on my Instagram because those are the exact terms that the people have used to describe me when I made my arguments. So yeah, this is the situation, right? Apparently, people have so this particular conversation can't be had without mentioning the fact that every time I open my mouth, I am called bigoted, privileged, apparently reeks and smacks of privilege and all of that nonsense. I've been called a lot of colorful terms in the times that I've made certain arguments, and I've just decided to keep doing it. I've dug myself a hole. I'm not going to get out of it. I'm going to dig deeper and see where it goes. In this particular issue, every time I've stood up for Hinduism, I've been attacked. I've been called bigoted, Brahminical, patriarch, and a bunch of other names. And I've just decided, you know what, this is funny. I'm going to keep going ahead with it. All right. So this particular temple, Sabarimala, does not believe that women should not be allowed to worship or enter the temple. And that's the general understanding of a bunch of people. That's literally some of the messages that I'm seeing here. All right. At that particular time, so after that particular conversation, I took a decent hike from people, from that particular individual for a while. And I started thinking really hard about this. This person clearly doesn't know anything about Sabarimala, doesn't even know the fact that women are allowed into Sabarimala, just of a certain age aren't allowed into it. And yet I'm facing all of these, and it took me down this deep rabbit hole of understanding Hinduism. And that's where my entire journey really began, about understanding the political spectrum of what is happening in this world and how religion is so deeply connected with politics in my country. And it's necessary to understand all of this, because my identity is basically being used as either a shield or a sword, or it's being blamed for the problems of certain individuals and certain groups. So it's a bad thing for me to be willfully ignorant after knowing that there's an issue. All right. So this is what happened. This is the entire argument in a nutshell. The other side assumed that women of all ages weren't allowed into a temple. And the second, once that particular thing was like, no, sorry, women are allowed into the temple, just a certain age is not allowed, they conflated the issue with menstruation. Now, bear in mind that in India, the act of menstruation is worshipped. There are certain people who don't understand the entire process, but essentially, the physical act of menstruation itself is something worthy of worship. There are certain temples where men aren't even allowed near the temple. And that's during the time that the goddess is believed to be menstruating. Only women are allowed into the temple. And that particular time is celebrated. And no man will go and ask to be allowed into that particular temple. I believe and this is particularly true in Kamakya. All right, this is one of the main seats of the goddess, particularly tantric worship. And in Kamakya, on certain times, at certain times, men are not allowed into the temple. Only women are. And it's during the time that the act of menstruation is being worshipped, because it's believed that the goddess is menstruating at that time. Now, this is the issue, right? They don't believe that they don't understand the fundamental topic. They know nothing about the temple, and still they want to run their mouth. And that's where I started having an issue. I've listened to a bunch of different debates to try to understand this particular issue. And when I listen to this particular topic, and I will link this particular episode, this particular debate, and I'll summarize it for you as well. Now, there are two sides that are talking about all of this. The name of the video itself is Triple Talaq versus Sabarimala, different case studies for different things, something along that. It's basically Triple Talaq versus Sabarimala. It's talking about the issue where in Islam a woman can be divorced just like by saying the three words talaq, talaq, talaq. Just by doing that, a woman can be just like that. She's divorced. And this was something that came about, and it was debated. For some reason, this was equal to the right of a particular age group of women to enter the temple. I listened to the entire debate multiple times. At certain times, I've even taken notes. The argument from one side, the side that did not want women of a particular age to enter the temple, they wanted to preserve the traditions, their arguments came from all directions. They spoke about the Shastras, they gave evidence, and whenever they brought up the topic of menstruation, it was clearly refuted. Do you know what the arguments were from the other side? I have been promised equality. The Supreme Court has given me permission to enter the temple. I will enter the temple. Because Supreme Court has given me permission to enter the temple, I will enter the temple. That's all. That's the crux of one particular individual who's probably started the entire thing. Every time she came on the mic, that's all she said. And the other things were obviously they would attack it by attaching it to discrimination, to untouchability, to taboo, and really bad things. They make it out to be such a huge issue. What happened was essentially they came out with a conclusion and they fit all their evidence around that particular conclusion. Like, this is sexist, this temple is sexist, these people are patriarchal, they don't want women to worship, and then they built a narrative around that. And now, as a Hindu myself who has visited this temple at least 4 to 5 times, and I've gone through the entire process of doing sadhana, I know for a fact I've experienced certain things in that temple. I'm not going to go into that. Probably never. But I know that there's something there. There's some great energy there. Now, the end of the debate, there was one beautiful summary of the entire case by Jesai Deepak. I think during the entire video, he speaks very rarely. He keeps quiet for most of the video. He lets other people do the talking. Until one point where he's probably had enough. And this is my introduction to Jesai Deepak, by the way. It was brilliant because he just came about and he just stood up and metaphorically stood up and he spoke out on this particular thing. And he said, it doesn't matter whether India is a secular nation or not. Because by definition, a place of worship is not a secular place. And he continued, So please do not apply secular logic to religious places, because you will not tolerate application of religious logic to secular places. The idea is that right to equality, right to, and all this, these are secular ideas. And the interesting part is that there have been Muslim women who want to enter Sabarimala, a temple, which by their practice is technically haram because they're not even supposed to go near idols. It's a very interesting thing. Anyway, so this was my introduction to the entire world. This particular, you know how YouTube functions. Every single time you watch a video, you're going to be recommended videos similar to that. So I watched a bunch of debates. I've watched our man J.Sai Deepak actually debate Shashi Tharoor as well and rip his arguments apart. I've watched him talk to Owaisi. And just like that, like my entire feed was filled with topics like these. And I've tried to examine this with a great deal of restraint, as well as I've tried to be as impartial as I can be. I understand that it's obvious that I might have some internal biases and I can't do anything about it, but I do my best to remain as impartial as possible when it comes to topics like this. The fact of the matter is, only Hindus are expected to be tolerant, to bow down, to cow down, to accept other religions and their practices, whereas ours are always ridiculed, mocked, were put down. Only our practices have to be secularized, modernized, and so on and so forth. Other religions are allowed to do as they wish. So this was the beginning of an awakening. I realized, oh, I don't know the world as well as I thought I did. I thought it was all hunky-dory. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot of dirty politics going on. I need to understand it. I need to read more about this particular topic. I need to understand why my country is so divided. Why and how did we get here? And that's part of the process. And that's why I've started speaking on this particular topic now, because it's reached a crescendo. I've done a great deal of listening, absorbing, digesting. It's time to start putting things out there. This is the beginning of the Indic Renaissance. Let's go, dude. Oh, also, Mr. J.Sai Deepak, if by chance you ever hear about this, in a particular podcast you had mentioned that it would be nice to hear new voices in this particular topic, because the ideas are not going to be, people are not going to get bored of the ideas too quickly. They might get bored of the people representing those facts. So this is my attempt, man. It'll be nice if you listen to this and eventually come onto the podcast to have a conversation with me. It'll be nice. Also, I've got like a couple of your books. I'd like them to be signed, please. Yeah. So that's about it for today's podcast. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for checking it out. I will see you again next week. Bye.